Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, they're mean, they're bean, they're machine, they're playing Sega Genesis games for the very first team. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. It's kind of crazy to think that we're here at the end of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Big year for the show. 5 years, 500 episodes.
Yeah. We did, we ranked the Mario costumes in Super Mario Odyssey. That took us 2 weeks.
That's right. I'm also trying to remember things that we did this year. But it was a good year.
It was a good year.
It was a lot of fun.
It was the return to recording in person.
That's right.
Which that felt huge to me. Look, we played through most of Triforce Heroes with Matt Acevedo. That was super fun.
Yep.
But look, this episode is not about us reminiscing about episodes that we've recorded earlier.
Not at all.
We've got brand new to us games to talk about from 30 years ago. You are in, of course, week 2 of our Sega Genesis. What are we calling this? Do we have a
Sega Genesis celebration?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a gala?
Okay, sure. I was gonna
We're
ask.
dressed for it.
I was gonna ask about the gown.
Yeah,
But
you're right.
it felt
I'm
good.
dressed for it. I
Yes.
didn't want to throw you under the bus.
Okay,
but it's
here
true.
we go. Well, we may as well end the year the way we started.
Fighting about clothes.
Yes, but before we get to all of that, would you like to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch? You can certainly try. All you gotta do is email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send you my copy of this video game. There may be a copy of Untitled Goose Game inside my copy of Sonic Forces. Look, man, it's just something that happens. Yeah, you gotta deal with it either way. Play it, don't play it for as long as you want. Send it back. It doesn't cost you anything.
Here's another thing you can do to either end your year on a good note, or depending on when you're listening to this, start your year on a good note, or really have the middle of your year,
Right.
kickstart a fresh start in June.
Look. There's always going to be a time where you need a good note.
Yeah,
be it the
that's
beginning,
right.
the end, or
Thank
middle
you
of the
for
year.
saving me and not having to come up with, stuff in January and February and on and on and on.
Right.
Here's what you can do. You can leave us a 5-star review on the U.S. Apple Podcast Store or wherever you get your podcast. If you leave us a review on the U.S. Apple Podcast Store, we'll give you a shout out on the show. That's the storefront that we check. But if you review us, favorite us, share us in any way anywhere else, send us an email, hit us up on Twitter. We would love to give you a shout out. Thank you so much to everybody who has left us a review. It's been a while since we've had a review on the U.S. Apple Podcast Store. So if you've been thinking about it,
then you should get on it. However, keep in mind that we are recording this episode about 2 weeks in advance, so you could have already left us a review and we haven't talked about it yet.
That's right.
That's very possible. We're banking a couple episodes here so we can so that we can end the year on a high note, just as you can end the year on a high note by giving us a 5-star review on whatever platform you take in your podcast. Mark, are you ready to get into it? Are you ready to talk about some Sega Genesis games?
Yes, let's do it.
Here we go. Today, we are talking about 3 games. I played Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium, or a fraction thereof. Mark played Strider, or a fraction thereof, and then we both played Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
Yeah, and before we get into talking about this week, I do feel like there's a little bit of expectation from myself because last week we ended up loving all 3 games.
Yes.
That we played.
Did we love Golden Axe?
No, you're right. We
begrudgingly respected it by the end.
You're right.
Which was almost more surprising than
we
loving
would
it.
see, it's like when 2 people who are driving Jeeps drive like stop next to each other at a
Yes.
stoplight.
Yes.
And they like give each other like a nod or like a
As
rumph.
As a former Jeep owner, I I can say yes, I'm familiar with this look and this feeling.
And I feel like that was us in Golden Axe.
Yeah.
We pulled up to the stoplight together and we're like, we may not be the same people.
But like we think the same things are important.
That's right. That's right.
That's how we feel about
Golden Axe is a lifestyle brand. That's what we're saying.
I mean, it's not right. Like there is something very like evocative about the like arcade brawler like that. Well, maybe lifestyle isn't totally right. That it does feel like part of like arcade rat culture.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
It makes 100% of sense to me because
Yeah.
you and I have based our entire identities on Nintendo.
Yes.
So
yes.
Golden Axe can be an identity. But this is, of course, not about Golden
No,
Axe.
we are
All
not.
I was saying
Not about Golden Axe
is
today.
that last week we had a great time with those 3 Genesis games that were new to us, or mostly new to us. And this week, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on Phantasy Star.
And I'm excited to hear your thoughts on Strider. And we're actually going to start with your thoughts on Strider as we started with my thoughts on whatever the heck game I played last week. What did I play? Gunstar Heroes?
Gunstar Heroes.
So, Mark, I would love to hear about Strider. This is the only not Sega published game that we have on our list.
So
right?
it is published by Sega,
Ooh.
but it is based on a Capcom arcade game that released in 1989, but Sega ported it themselves for the Genesis.
Man, what a weird time. I mean, and this is part of just like the sort of like infrastructure of there being arcade games and 2 different home consoles that like people were porting things to other things that like had no relationship to the original.
And there is an NES like Strider, but apparently it's a very different game. And the Genesis one is supposed to be very close to the arcade game. I have never... Strider is completely new to me, not just on Genesis. I've never played the arcade game. I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
Like, it was totally new to me. Do you have any familiarity with Strider?
This is great. So the only... Strider is a playable character in some Capcom versus game.
Okay.
So either a Marvel versus Capcom, could be either 2 or 3, or like Tatsunoko versus Capcom, or one of those kinds of games. So I know I have messed around with this character. Does he wear a scarf? Is he like a ninja?
He's like a... He's a white dude.
Okay, yeah.
But so he's not like a
Look,
ninja
in the
ninja.
80s, white dudes could be ninjas.
But he's not like a ninja, but he is like a secret agent type guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then maybe I.
But I don't know if he
really
wears
know
a
anything about
scarf.
it. Okay.
It's not rendered that clearly. Maybe he wears a scarf later. I don't believe he's wearing a scarf.
Is he mostly wearing like blue or dark colors?
I want to say like pink, mostly pink.
Then maybe I don't know this character at all.
Well, also,
and I'm thinking of something else.
Yeah. Well, truly, we will never know. But I don't want to bury the lead here. I loved Strider. The game is I found it to be insanely hard.
Okay.
So it's like a roller coaster. Or actually, do you know what it felt like? It felt like playing it felt like the experience of watching Mad Max Fury Road, where like once it gets going, it is just like a roller coaster and doesn't really let up.
Yeah, and you feel like it needs to let you go for a second.
Yeah, like
where like you almost feel sick even though it's great.
Yeah, because the game is relentless. Like it really feels like a theme park ride. Playing Strider feels like somebody made a game today, like an indie game, and they were like, I want to make the perfect game that didn't exist from my childhood.
Sure.
Right? But like I love these bullet hell games.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to throw all these different elements in, and that game is going to be Strider. Except they did make it in the 80s, and it is the game that people love. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it sort of does. I just want to interject here and say that
Does he have a scarf?
Strider has a scarf.
Okay.
He's mostly wearing blue as he appears in Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. So he's evidently a mainstay in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. Wears a scarf and blue.
I've got to say, surprises me he wears a scarf. This feels like a Edna mode. This feels like an Edna mode cape situation.
Oh, sure. Like he's gonna get trapped.
He's like flying around in zero gravity. There's robots with claws that are grabbing at him. Like the scarf just seems like a bad idea.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. Also, I would venture to guess that from these renders in Marvel vs. Capcom, they have retconned his whiteness in future games.
And actually, he may not be white in this one because I think it is based on an anime character. In fact, his name is absolutely, definitely a Japanese name.
Yeah, but I mean, all of that gets like murky. A, in the 80s in animation, and B, in video games in the 80s and 90s.
So the setup for this game is, or like the setting for it is amazing. So Strider glides in on a rocket hang glider, and there's a little bit of text at the beginning that tells you the year is 2048, and you're in this like, they call it Eurasia, but it's like this techno, futuristic, everything's really like bright colors.
Yeah, like a
Soviet
neon
state.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so you start on like the roof of St. Petersburg, and immediately the game is just like go, go, go. You cannot stop moving in Strider or you will die because there's too many enemies on screen. There's too many like bullets and everything. It's like you have to constantly be moving forward. And so
what kind of defenses do you have against these bullets?
You don't,
Is it just like run and jump?
The only thing you can like run, you can jump, and you have a Cypher sword, which is on Strider's back, but he pulls it so quickly that really like in the game, it looks like you are shooting this like arc out.
Oh, sure. So a little bit like the Ninja Gaiden almost.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that is like, that's it. That's pretty much all you get through the entire game. There are a couple of times where you can activate these kind of like robot companions. One is this like tiger thing. One is this little like round robot that follows you around and kind of provides like a little bit of a shield. But that's pretty much it. There, you can gain up to 5 bars of health. Every time you get hit, you lose 1 bar of health. But in addition to that, as you're moving through levels, there is like a timer, and it's not a timer for the entire level. It is a timer for sections of the level. So that's another reason why you can't just like hang out.
Oh, sure. So
you
have to like hit
be
little
moving
checkpoints
forward.
almost?
Exactly.
Okay.
And as you hit checkpoints, you earn more time. And so there were a couple of times where the game is not very long. It's like 20 minutes if you know what you're doing.
Geez, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty short. But
Mark, do you at this point know what you're doing?
I know what I'm doing. I could not beat this game.
Okay.
I got to the final level, but it was just too much. Too many bullets, too many like little robots flying around, too many. It turns into like a boss rush at the end. So all the bosses that you fought before.
Yeah.
It's very cool, but like I couldn't beat it. Even using the rewind feature on Nintendo Switch Online, it was just like, it was too much.
That sounds very cool and very much like games that I have enjoyed in the last couple years, like The Messenger, like Cyber Shadow. How is the like mobility? How's getting around the levels? Does it feel
I think
good?
I think it does feel pretty good, but I think I made the mistake of using the Nintendo. I used my Joy-Con to play it, and it's a game that's really made for the Sega Genesis controllers, kind of like 8-directional D-pad that made it very easy for you to choose like those in between the cardinal directions.
Yeah, totally.
Because Strider's movement is based on like you can use all 8 areas. Yeah. And so I was using a Joy-Con, which means I was trying to replicate that not just with the D-pad, which is like kind of challenging enough, but with like the 4 discrete buttons. Yeah. And that was not a good call.
Well, and the D-pad, such as it is on a set of Joy-Cons, is really just 4 buttons.
Yeah, that's what I'm exactly.
And yeah, the original Genesis controller is a D-pad in that it is one big button, but also it's like webbed. Yeah. Right? So that like the cardinal directions, there's also like a little bit of button.
Right. So it makes it very easy to use like all 8 inputs.
Yeah. Has anyone ever revisited that design?
Not that I know of.
Okay. because this was also something that I was thinking about while playing Gunstar Heroes, which is also, really reliant on you being able to shoot in all directions. There are 2 modes at the beginning of Gunstar Heroes. You get to select either anytime you're shooting, you're standing still so that you can literally shoot in all 8 directions, or that you like run and gun, and therefore you're just restricted to left, right, up, and up left, or like crouching and then like shooting the down directions, but like that would cause you to stop. But yeah, it makes me look. This was a question I was going to save for later in the episode, but do you feel at all like tempted or compelled to get a Genesis controller for the Nintendo Switch?
I can absolutely see the benefits.
Yeah.
I don't know that I actually will, but I can 100% see the benefits for playing like a game like Strider.
Yeah,
I think it would make a huge difference, a really big difference.
Can you tell me about like any of the levels if they're all
I
like
would
roller coaster rides?
love
Yes,
to.
yes.
Okay, because it's like so you start in this like kind of like Blade Runner-esque St. Petersburg, and so there's a big bad in the game just who's referred to as like the Master, and basically you are like chasing after him, but in St. Petersburg you are basically like you land on the roof and then you're making your way down, and at the end you end up in like this like parliament, like in parliament, so like it's a room with a bunch of
dudes in powdered wigs,
like bureaucrats,
yeah.
Sitting in chairs, and then they but they're all like cyborgs, and then they form this dragon. They all like come together, link up to form this like dragon, and that's the final boss.
That's pretty cool.
It's amazing. And then after that, you're like in Siberia, and the final boss of that, and so the final boss of that one is like this techno bounty hunter, and from Siberia, like at the end of the level, you jump onto this airship, and so the third level is on an airship called the Airship Balrog. I mean,
Mark, come on.
So that's what I mean, where it feels like something that like an indie creator would make today, and you'd be like, those are all like cool references.
Yeah.
But they did it in the like in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, well, and it seems like then that this is the sort of thing that people like the developers of The Messenger and Cyber Shadow and all those are recreating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, and on the airship, the final boss of the airship is so cool because you're running through the airship, and suddenly gravity changes. So instead of jumping up, like you're on the top of the ceiling, and you drop down, and then you drop into this chamber.
Another Gunstar Heroes thing, by the way. But
right,
from the minecart levels. But keep going.
And then you drop down into this chamber, and it's like circular, and you can like slide around on the sides. But the boss is this big like I want to call it a satellite, but it's like a satellite mashed up with a robot, and it has like these little debris that's
circling it,
orbiting it, right? And so those can hurt you, but you get caught up in its like gravity as well, and so you are like 0G, like rotating around.
Oh, that's cool.
This like robot just trying to kill it. It's really cool. Do you know what it kind of reminded me of? That sequence in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation where Tom Cruise has to jump into this like underwater thing and hold his breath for like 6 minutes while there's that like rotating arm.
Yes.
For whatever reason, it made me kind of like think of that. But it's a very, very, very cool sequence, and nothing really outstays its welcome. It's a 20-minute game, so everything's really short. After that, you destroy the airship and you end up in the Amazon. This is probably maybe like the weaker level.
The Amazon? You really like went on a journey in this airship.
It's like an Amazonian jungle that has these female warriors. They're kind of making
Amazons.
Yeah.
Like our favorite wonderful butted character from Golden Axe.
Yeah,
she was an Amazon.
That's right. It's probably my like least favorite level. They're making some kind of very stereotypical like grunty jungle noise type stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But there are dinosaurs that you can run on their backs, and the final boss is this like giant mech dinosaur. Then finally you end up in the third moon, which is the big bad's lair, and it's totally a greatest hits from it's like the most bullet hell of bullet hell possible, and
Yeah.
then turns into a boss rush where at the very end, the parliamentary dragon thing comes back, but you have to ride its back,
Oh,
and you
that's
have to
so
like stay on
cool.
top of it until it goes up to where you actually fight the master, which I could never beat.
Yeah.
But it's just like
So like
it's amazing. Strider is so cool.
Five levels.
5 levels. Yep.
Man, that sounds so cool.
I
really want to check it out now.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
How about tunes? How's the music?
Pretty good. It is not something that I think I would like. It didn't really leave a big enough impression on me that I can like recall it, but it was not bad. You know what I mean? Where sometimes games have like memorably bad music. This was not that case.
Yeah. Well, shoot, that sounds great. I don't think I have any other questions for you other than it just sounds like a super fun time.
Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. You will know very quickly if it is a game that appeals to you. And I think the Nintendo Switch Online is a great place to play it because I loved being able to reverse time and correct mistakes. Yeah.
Also, what a great one of the things that can be sort of frustrating about these games, like Golden Axe, right, is that it can be very difficult, but also not that long, right? So that like you're playing through it and then like you don't finish it, and then you're like, oh, okay, well now like 30 minutes have gone by, and I can either try to do that 30 minutes again, or like you kind of like, well, what am I doing? But the fact that it's like just part of this like greater package that is the Sega Genesis Nintendo Switch Online means that was a fine way to spend 30 minutes.
Yeah, totally.
Should we move on to discussing Phantasy Star 4 End of the Millennium?
Yes, I'm very excited to hear about this.
Okay, so Phantasy Star 4 End of the Millennium, not a 20-minute game, but more like a 25-ish hour game. In the lead up to this, I kept saying that it was a 70-hour RPG. It's not. It's not quite that long. I did not get to the end of this game. I think I probably got about halfway through it, which means I know that there are a lot of like twists and turns in the game's narrative that I have not experienced, and therefore like worlds and even systems I think that I have not even accessed. But Phantasy Star 4 End of the Millennium is a Japanese turn-based RPG in the style of Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, but with a bunch of notable differences to those two franchises that I know very well and that I'm very familiar with. For me, playing Phantasy Star was an exercise in like learning a different vocabulary, because your characters have these techniques and skills that are, basically that game's equivalent of spells, and like you can show me like lit, fire, ice, cure, whatever in a Final Fantasy game, and I know what all those things mean. There's a spell or an ability in Phantasy Star that's just res, res. Mark, what do you think that is?
I resurrect.
Okay, so what do you think that does?
Brings a party member back to life.
So I think it's short for restore, and it brings back hit points, but it doesn't bring someone back to life.
That feels very Final Fantasy 1, where you're like, what does this do?
Yeah, what?
Yeah.
And like I can play Final Fantasy 1 now, and I know what everything does because like I've seen how, first of all, I've played that game a bunch of times, but I've seen how they've iterated on it. So like, I can sort of like backwards do the math, but like, there's a spell in this game that's Zan, Z-A-N, and it is an area effect that like hits all the enemies, and it's wind damage. And like, what is that? What does any of that mean? Watt, W-A-T, is an ice spell. And the way that it like goes up in levels, like Final Fantasy now will do like Fire, Fira, and Firaga, right? And that's, again, that's not natural, right? Like that's something that you have to learn and like understand. And the way that this game does it, it's their prefixes, and the like second level up is GI. So like second level res is Girez, and third level res is, I think it's NI res, Ni res. So, or maybe new res, something like that. So like for me, and I know I'm really drilling down into this and maybe in like at a granular level, but for me it was like really having to figure out the language this game was speaking at me that I did not understand.
Yeah, especially have you? I have not. Have you played any of the Phantasy Star games before?
No. And this is also the fourth numbered game in the franchise. There's also a Fantasy Star Gaiden that takes place, at some other point and came out before 4. So there are probably a lot of the vocabulary of this game that by the fourth/fifth entry, they didn't feel the need to reiterate those to players because players would already be familiar with it from the earlier games. So there was a long time, probably 6 or 7 hours, where I like did not trust any of the spells I hadn't already used in battle or whatever, right? So it took me a long time to sort of like settle into what this game is. Because I'm also so stuck in like Final Fantasy Dragon Quest land that like I sort of expect a fantasy based RPG to be mostly like sword and sorcery, right? And then with like Final Fantasy having like little sort of like cyberpunky steampunk elements like thrown in here and there, some high technology mixed in. This is the opposite, where it is a sci-fi premise with the occasional like high fantasy thing thrown in. I would say that the setting and characters and it's like straight out of Dune, or at least on this first planet that I'm playing on. So the first planet is a planet called Matovia, or Motovia, and it is a desert planet. The most commonly encountered enemies are sandworms, and like creatures like that. And I ran into like a giant sandworm that just totally wiped out my, it was like an actual like party killer from just like a random encounter. And so the setting there is very like different, very specific. The setup of the game is that you're on this planet, and it's like hundreds of years after the events of the previous games, and you're sort of on like a dying world, which is part of why it's this like desert area, and through the course of the first like 10 hours or so that I played, you discover that, there's been like there are too many monsters. Classic RPG setup, right? There are more monsters lately than usual, and your character Chaz. All the characters have 4-letter names, so his name is Chaz, and a legendary monster hunter by the name of Alice are tasked with figuring out why there are more monsters than usual. And as you're doing this, you're tasked by like the academy or whatever, to figure this out. But really early on, you discover that the academy is like breeding monsters in the basement, and you're like, "What's going on?" Like you guys are sort of behind it. But the whole thing unfolds in these very like JRPG ways of like this thing that you thought was this is really this, and like. You discover like the original like life raft that came to the planet to like colonize it and sort of like regulate the environment, and how all of that has gone wrong with like people abusing the technology that was in that life raft and blah 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 blah. And it almost has a little bit of like, that part in Chrono Trigger where you travel to the future and you've discovered that like the world has been just like basically wrecked. That's your base reality for this game. So like you travel from town to town, and the towns are so samey, at least at this point, as I've only been on the desert planet, because it's all desert, right? And there are sandworms everywhere, so like everywhere is plagued by like a lack of access to water or earthquakes or whatever. Like everyone is just in dire straits the whole time. So I have had, to this point, I think I've had 6 or 7 different party members. The game, you can have up to 5 people in your party at a given time, and the perspective that they like show you the fights in is pretty cool. So it is sort of the original Dragon Warrior setup of you see the enemies like they're sort of like looking at you first person style, or like Earthbound kind of, but you also see the backs of your characters, so you're sort of like over their shoulder. And as their like turn comes up to like make selections for them, the rest of the characters disappear, so you can see like the back of your character as you're like selecting what they're going to do that turn.
For some reason, I think of Phantasy Star as having like first person dungeon. Like
no, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe in a different entry, but not this game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the game is. I was trying to describe this to Sarah earlier, but when you die, you have very little recourse. When your party members die, you have very little recourse but to go back to a village and stay in an inn to get everyone back to life and back to full health. It is sort of the anti-Final Fantasy in that, like, Final Fantasy, you can buy Phoenix Down anywhere, right? And you can just stock up on them when your characters die. As long as you get through the battle, you can bring people back to life. No problem. You have a limited inventory in this game, and you cannot, to the point that I am at right now, like 10 hours into the game, buy items to bring your characters back to life. Nor do any of my characters know spells to bring characters back to life. However, they do know spells, and I do have items that can like escape a dungeon and teleport back to a town. So it wants you to be able to like keep everyone alive as you're doing your exploration. And if you can't make it all the way to, the next part, then you got to like go back and try it all again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
So, and there's also like the stakes of any individual fight are so high. Like right now where I am in the game, I have 4 characters and they all have about like 150-ish hit points, somewhere between 100 and 200. And, when you think about like a normal RPG, you're going to expect to fight a bunch of different fights between like one save point and another save point, right? And you never really expect for like a random encounter to chip away more than like 10% of your character's health at over the course of a fight. My dudes with like 150 hit points will be hit with attacks that deal 50, 60 damage. Like at any time, I'm like constantly managing health and like healing up between fights and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like obsessively buying new items and armor and weapons, but like everything is just so, they want you to like do it right. You know what I mean? So it feels, and they've even tried just like sort of grinding like mindlessly for a while to like level up, and like that's table stakes. Like the game demands that you grind and then play smart.
That's so interesting. I mean, it almost sounds kind of tedious.
There is an element of tedium to it, but I mean, with very few exceptions, JRPGs of this era are largely tedious. This came to the States in 95. So like I guess that is in the like Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 4 area, but those games are like legendary, best in class as far as I'm concerned. And which still leaves Phantasy Star 4 End of the Millennium as a pretty good role-playing game. One of the things that I really, really like about it is the way it deals with this is in a pre-cutscene world, right? Like we don't have CG cutscenes of stuff, but whenever it wants to take the drama to a higher level than just showing, the like character's face and then like dialogue, it does little like manga-esque cutscenes where like there's still like the dialogue playing out on the bottom of the screen, but then there are these like beautifully rendered, pixel art images of whatever action is happening like in this scene. So it's like a cool little like comic book storytelling as you are playing through this deep RPG.
How is the music of Phantasy Star 4?
So I find the music to be a little rough.
Oh yeah.
Sort of short loops, and with that that Sega Genesis sound chip that can feel so appropriate for an action game or for like a Sonic the Hedgehog style game, that like is just not really well suited for like you're wandering around the town or like here's an open world map or whatever. So I don't love it, but this is also a game that I have been playing and put on other music, because I don't need to hear the same sort of loop over and over again. But I gotta say, a lot of these characters, despite their stupid names, like Chaz and Alice, Alys, are cool, and like I like them, and unique in a way that a lot of Final Fantasy characters or Dragon Quest characters are. Like sort of like end up being kind of generic eventually, as far as like their progression is concerned, right? That you start to realize that like, oh yeah, he's just a mage or whatever. All of these characters seem to be like different types, like the difference between Chaz, who's like a warrior, and Alice, who is a hunter, where you're like, what truly is the difference between these two characters? And she has a lot more like area of effect attacks, and he has a lot more like focused on individual enemies, but like stronger attacks there. I've got this like blue bat person named Grizz who's on my team, who's super cool and carries a big axe. Like he's just dope, and I love him.
Grizz is a pretty good name.
Grizz, Gryz.
Love it.
I love it. I've got a cool cat girl named Rico, who attacks with her claws. She's pretty cool, and an android is on my team right now, and I just got the android, so I can't remember her name. But she uses a different system to everybody else because she's not alive. You can't use healing items on her. She has to use her own healing stuff, because she's not a living creature. She's a robot. So yeah, I don't know. Like there are 2 other planets that you go to in the game that I have not gotten to yet, but in preparing for this, I wanted like, what am I missing? And it seems like there's just so much more in this game.
Wow.
So I don't. This is going to be the one. This is maybe like the golden axe for me, where it's not a game that I love, but I respect it a lot. And as I get deeper into it and start to actually like understand the vocabulary of the game, I'm enjoying it a lot more than when I started.
Yeah, it seems so like academically very cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like I love the idea that it is science, like a science fiction JRPG. I feel like we do not get very many of those.
Yeah.
I love the fact that like you were talking about, I have this new android character, but she uses different healing items because she's not organic. Like that's in theory really cool, but I could also see how it would make like the playing the game not very fun. You know what I mean? Like, that could be an annoying system.
Like just the second
like
you think you have something figured out.
But it's just like another thing to manage. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know this, and so it's totally fine if you don't know this. But do you know it was Phantasy Star 4 the last of like the Phantasy Star JRPG? I know it lived on as Phantasy Star Online, but were there entries after Phantasy Star 4?
So not until Phantasy Star Online.
Got it.
Yeah, like the original Phantasy Star series, the first game came out in 87. I'm looking at a chart right now. The first one came out in 87, and then 2 and 3 came out in 89 and 90. And then in 92, Phantasy Star Adventure, Phantasy Star Gaiden came out, and then Phantasy Star 4, which I guess is technically the 6th Phantasy Star game. So yeah, all those came out in the course of 6 years, and then not until 2000 that Phantasy Star Online comes out. It makes me just curious about the series in general, but maybe in the way that like the Dune movie made me curious about Dune in general, where like there's something intriguing there, but I don't know that I have the energy to like really dig into it, and to do anything shy of really digging into it is probably doing the series a disservice.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting game, not necessarily one that I am all that eager to like go check out. Because I also feel like you're starting with the 4th one, it's probably the most refined, and so going back might, to 1, 2, or 3 might even be harder.
Yeah, possibly. Well, and there are parts of playing it that feel not like I'm playing a 16-bit era game, but that I'm playing like an 8-bit era game almost. When you're navigating around the menus, that is sloppy. Like it feels way more like playing the original Final Fantasy on the NES than playing either 2 or 3 on the Super NES. Like it's just you have in your item screen, it shows 8 items at a time. And then you can't just like scroll down the list to see more. You have to push right to like bring up another page of it. And there are just like things like that where it's like you're making me click too many times. And it had been probably just spoiled by the likes of Final Fantasy and other 16-bit RPGs. But I just wish all that stuff was like kind of faster and snappier, especially when I've got to like stop and heal up after every freaking fight. Yeah. So that's my experience with Phantasy Star for End of the Millennium. I would love if there are Phantasy Star fans out there that like want to tell me to like keep going, or want to tell me that like this isn't the one I should have tried, or whatever. I would love to hear more feedback on this. It is tough to, because we recorded the previous episode about this a week ago. So in 1 week's time, I played as much of Phantasy Star 4 as I could to talk about it. But it's, that's not an ideal way to like get through a long RPG. Should I keep going? Mark, what do you think?
I kind of think, since I'm not doing it, I think, you totally should, because it'd be interesting to see how the game changes when you get off of this desert planet.
Right.
Knowing what you know about these other 2 planets, does it seem like they're more lush, or there's more variety, or do you think when you get on there it's going to be a different location but more of the same?
I think it's kind of the second. One of the other planets is like a moon, so also like a desolate sort of thing. So but like those are interesting settings, right? Like, or at least they are non-typical for that kind of game.
So that's how I feel like when you're describing Phantasy Star 4 to me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting choice. You don't see that very often.
Right.
But is there a reason you don't see that very often? Because, is there a reason this is the last one in the series?
Yeah.
It all is so like I was saying, like academically interesting to me, but does not sound particularly fun to play.
Yeah. It's also, beautifully Japanese, like in the way that I feel like the Final Fantasy games are sort of like abstracted into sort of a like European fantasy setting with like obvious like Japanese like overtones. This feels like anime, right? So like the little character portraits look like anime drawings of characters and not like the highly stylized Final Fantasy things. So like it does feel kind of cool to be like, it feels more like Dragon Warrior in that way, more like Dragon Quest in that way. Which is the real one? Dragon Quest. Is what it's really called. But yeah, it's a neat game, and I'm sort of bummed that we have now hit the thing that I was like playing it for, that I won't have the external pressure to go back to it. Because there are parts of it that I do find really interesting.
Also, when you were talking about the different spells and not knowing what they do and all that kind of stuff, recognizing that the manuals and all that are, I'm sure scans of them are available online. I do think it's a missed opportunity that Nintendo has not digitized those and included them with every single game on Nintendo Switch Online, NES, SNES, Nintendo 64, and now Genesis, because I feel like that a lot of times in older games, they like that information would all be in the manual.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And the story information and all that kind of stuff. And I just wish that they had really like completed the package of all of these games and included that in there.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's tough because I have consulted a number of different websites as I've been playing Phantasy Star 4. And you know, when I'm like, okay, so what do these spells do? And then it just brings up like a chart, and I'm like, oh man, you know. And then it's like, okay, so this is an ice type spell, and I'm like, okay, what does this game think?
Yeah.
Ice does to, you know,
Yep,
like
yep.
everything. It's like not only understanding a new vocabulary, but then also understanding like new functionalities and like charts and stuff.
And that's kind of the danger of these like fan wikis, is they're made by fans a lot of times, like for the audience of fans, and so they're kind of sometimes impenetrable.
Yeah, totally. And like, you know, it has a little bit of that like Pokemon thing where like I get how to play a turn-based RPG, but like I don't have the Pokemon type chart memorized, and like I come up against like a shadow thing, and I'm like I don't fairy, I don't know, I have no idea.
Right.
And you know, so it's like the same thing when it's like, okay, so here is a giant sandworm. What do you think it's weak against? I don't know. Fire? I don't know. It's hot all the time, so maybe not. Water? No. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Lightning? I don't know. And then you get like a robot character who has like different abilities, and you're like, yeah, there's so much, like every single move the characters get, I'm like, okay, what is that? What does it do? And a lot of times I will try them out in battle and see that they deal damage, and I'm like, okay, great, that's an option for later. And sometimes it seemingly doesn't trigger anything. And I'm like, did I just use it at the wrong time against the wrong enemies?
That's rough.
Is it doing something invisibly that I don't know? There are, and I've triggered it a couple times, but I don't know how I'm doing it. There are some times where the characters will do moves together. So like if you cast different spells, they will like link up and do something. But there's no like option within the game that is like, hey, do these two things together and it'll cast one powerful spell. A la like, again, like Chrono Trigger. Which makes that very obvious, and it's very fun and exciting when it happens. So yeah, I almost wish this game had like a Square Enix coat of paint on it to just make all of the parts of it a little bit snappier, a little bit easier for me to understand. Mark, should we move on to our final game of the Genesis celebration, whatever this is?
Gala.
Sorry, the gala. That's right. I forget because I'm just wearing a tank top and a pair of board shorts. I'm not formally dressed as you are.
Yeah, let's talk about Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine.
Mark, tell me about your history with Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine or Puyo Puyo.
Yeah, never played Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, and glancingly familiar with Puyo Puyo. Have played like demos for the Puyo Puyo Tetris, the first game, when that came to Switch, but otherwise not really familiar, and had a lot of difficulty wrapping my head around how Puyo Puyo works and like kind of like what the goal of it is, because I was very much in like a Tetris mindset.
Yeah,
where it's just
we've been playing a lot of Tetris the last couple of years.
Where it's like clear the board.
Yeah,
and that is, but is also not really the strategy for Puyo Puyo.
Yeah, so in Puyo Puyo / Dr. Robotnik's, and this is like, we're saying that Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is just Puyo Puyo with sort of Sonic characters, right? Like Dr. Robotnik definitely is a character in the game. Are you playing as Robotnik? I never really wrap my head around.
Yeah. I don't know. Are you supposed to be Sonic?
You never see Sonic.
You never see Sonic, but that's because you are Sonic. You are taking on the role of Sonic.
Sure, maybe. I think it's possible you're just you.
Yeah, I don't really know. And maybe later in the game, like I'm guessing the final in the story mode, like the final thing.
He is. He's
the
final boss.
Is Dr. Robotnik, but otherwise it's just these like robots that I don't have any familiarity with anyways.
Yeah, that I guess are like presumably his minions or something that you're playing these matches of Puyo Puyo against. And so the way Puyo works is the game will drop these little 2 bean, I don't know how to describe Puyos.
Yeah, they're like little jelly.
Yeah.
Like if you blew Guigi up,
yes,
he would turn into millions of beautiful pieces of little Puyo.
But each Puyo has a pair of eyes as well. So so there's like a sentient creature or something. And so each piece is 2 different Puyo, and they can either be the same color or different colors. And there's like 5 different colors of Puyo, right? There's the red, yellow, purple, green, and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is when you line up for Puyo either in a line or just connecting in any way, it clears them out. And your goal is to try and set up chain reactions so that when you clear one set of 4 Puyo, that it's going to make other ones sort of like slide into place and like link up and clear out.
And that's an important distinction because it's not like Tetris where if you eliminate 2 lines at a time, that's like a bonus.
Right.
It doesn't, like in Puyo Puyo, that doesn't really do anything. It's like one line needs to be eliminated and then the board shifts and then a second line is eliminated, or like a second grouping is eliminated, and that's when you get the bonus for it.
Yeah, so like if you drop one piece that just connects on the left and also connects on the right to get like 2 different things of Puyo gone, that's not special. You just get like one little score for it. The other thing about Puyo is that it is an expressly competitive game. So even when you are playing by yourself, you are playing against an AI opponent who's also playing Puyo. And so the way that you win is by racking up these combos and sending garbage over to the other side and knocking them out. That is not like that is Tetris has a mode like that, but you can play Tetris by yourself in a way that's just clearing lines and trying not to fill up the board.
Yeah.
But if you're just trying not to fill up the board, like Puyo would be way too easy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing with Puyo is that like you have to build up you know, a certain amount of just junk on your board, and so it's trying to balance that fine line between, you know, having enough that you can make chain reactions happen, or at least hope that they happen, but also that puts you a lot of times precariously close to, if your opponent gets a big chain reaction, you could be it will totally mess up your play.
Yeah, because the way that the junk, the damage works is that it is just dropping like, you know, little like dead space, like little pieces of garbage on the other person's board. And so if you're setting up something where you're like, okay, now I just need like a red Puyo to go here and like start the chain reaction, one of those garbage pieces can just fall in that spot that you were hoping to fill with a red Puyo, and then just like ruins your ability to get there. And you can undo the damage that people have done by scoring just a regular Puyo clear, and like all adjacent garbages go away at that point. So like you can fight back and like you can get back to a position where those things are useful. But man, a big score against your opponent, sometimes all it takes is like one big score to mess them up forever.
Yep.
But that's also something that I appreciate about Puyo is that, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, is that like no single match ever lasts super long.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Like they're all pretty quick.
I did not like love Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I think I enjoyed it in the same way that I there's something fun to me. It speaks to the child in me that it's like, hey, we took this puzzle game and we painted on, you know, your favorite characters, and that's what makes this like game so appealing. So that part of it I really liked, but the game itself I didn't really enjoy because I am not very good at Puyo. My brain does not really work that way. Like the best that I can explain it for myself is that Tetris is like checkers and Puyo is like chess. Like it requires a little bit more like advanced planning.
Yeah.
And I am horrible at chess because I don't really like think that way.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
Puyo, I guess, is more like speed chess then, right? Because like,
yeah, you have to make these snap decisions. So it does have that like element of it, but where I guess the parallel for me is like chess, you know, you're trying to think multiple moves ahead. And I feel like Puyo is the same way, that to be like successful, you're trying to like see the board in a way where you can, I'm setting up these like chain reactions, or at least hopeful chain reactions.
Yeah.
And it's really challenging for me to see the board that way.
Yeah.
Like I don't really operate that way. And so I like Dr. Robotnik's Bean Machine, but it's not something I'll ever go back to.
I mean, you know what, like my approach, because I also have like a little bit of a hard time like thinking of like the board holistically like that. And I know I'm not a great Puyo player, But I always think of like my goal is always just to get 3 Puyo in a row and then like create a barrier of like just one kind or another and then start another like set of 3 so that if you just have threes everywhere and then you start like dropping like to completion like on the side or something, like leave a little opening somewhere. Usually that's how I end up getting, and it is a lot of hoping that it works, right? And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it gets away from you, and you're like, well, now I just have a big pile of garbage I can't do anything with.
One thing I did like, so I played you and I played a few matches against each other, but for the most part, I played it just me versus the computer going through the story mode where you're up against like different robots. Mm-hmm. One thing I thought was cool, very simple but very effective, is that each robot has a different play style.
Yes.
Like some of them play very quickly and very aggressively. Others, are more slow and more methodical, and they obviously get more challenging the further you go. But I thought that was just like a simple but effective touch.
I like also that they give all the robots, I mean, it's not, you're kind of focused on what's happening, so it's hard to like perceive their personality, but there's like a little like image of the robot in the middle of the screen, and when they start to get like towards the top of the screen, like they make like a worried face.
Yeah,
and
they get
like
nervous.
Stressed out, which is super fun. The music in this game is neat, and
the music is very good. Yeah.
There is there's some like sort of classic Puyo music that I like better than the Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine music, but it feels appropriate to the Genesis sound chip, and all of that is really cool and fun. I think this is definitely a game that is better played, maybe like all video games, better played with a person that you are competing against instead of just running up against computer players.
Yeah, I feel like that. I mean, in my personal experience, especially not being very good at like Puyo or not being very good at like fighting games, I think that is true.
Right?
Where
no, I hear you,
as long as you're evenly matched.
Yeah. So I mean, like Sarah and I spent a good amount of time on Saturday playing Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine in the afternoon. It means something like we started playing around 2, just sort of being like, hey, I have to play this for the show. Do you want to like get into some Puyo? And then we played for like 2.5 hours. And just like shit talking each other and like having a fun time playing Puyo and like sort of trading the lead back and forth. Was just very like fun and satisfying, and like I would spend another afternoon doing that. But interesting little thing to note here, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is just Puyo, and Puyo is available on the Super NES Nintendo Switch Online. So this is a game that is effectively already available to you if you subscribe to the base level of this service. So while I think Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is a pretty good Puyo game, you already have a pretty good Puyo game on your Switch. So I don't know. It feels a little redundant to me. I guess I'm glad that it's there, just in case people, like that specific coat of paint on it. But yeah, it feels like a weird addition. All right. Those are our experiences with Strider, Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. All right, Mark, let's close this out. Okay, that is going to do it for this year of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts. If you like the episode, please share it on Facebook or Twitter, or wherever you share stuff. It helps us out tremendously when you do. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nin Cart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying, have a great new year. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you in 2022.
I'm Brian Husky. I'm bald.
And I'm Charlie Sanders, and I'm also bald. And we host Bald Talk on the Campfire Media Network.
Bald Talk is the podcast where two bald comedians talk to anyone bald about being bald.
But this show isn't just for baldies, Brian. Harrows will love it too.
Bald Talk gets into vulnerability, vanity, insecurity, and self-acceptance, reminding us that we all have our respective bald spots. Not that bald spots are a bad thing.
No way. I mean, my entire head is one big bald spot.
It is one huge, beautiful bald spot, Charlie.
Get Bald Talk on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, I have like a little bit of hair, but not like you. Like, you're really bald.
I'm truly bald.
Great. I mean, it's
I'm
great.
balder than you.
You are balder than me.
Only on Bald Talk. Campfire.